Emily Dickinson, the great American poet, testified to her faith with these words: "I never saw a moor, I never saw the sea, yet I know how the heather looks and what a wave must be. I never spoke with God, nor visited in heaven, yet certain am I of the spot, as if a chart were given." Emily Dickinson was somewhat of a recluse, living a hermit-like existence, spending most of her time reflecting on human life and her place within it. Many people have heard of the poet Emily Dickinson, but not many people have really studied her poetry and how the pictures she paints with her words are so stunningly developed. Expressions of how life truly is that are deep and insightful. Emily Dickinson lived from 1830 to 1886, and in that time she wrote over 1,800 poems on subjects from nature and creation to mortality and depression. She had a wide repertoire that really got to the heart of whatever subject she was examining. She's not widely known for her religious poetry, but that was a large section of her body of work and encompassed a great expression of her soul. Dickinson had a great spiritual foundation. Her family traced their roots all the way back to the first Puritans that came over here in 1630. As a child and as a teenager, she attended several tent revivals, growing up in her hometown of Amherst, but she could never buy into this prevailing teaching in these tent revivals about the worthlessness of humanity in the eyes of God. Fire and brimstone preachers calling humanity sinners in the hands of an angry God struck her as odd, confronted with the beautiful complexity of God's creation. And she could not quite devote herself to understanding the world in that way. Reflecting on her faith in the midst of these revival preachers and the fearful sermons they preached, Emily wrote dozens of poems about contemporary Christianity, the life and teachings of Jesus, and how faith intersects with life. But Dickinson was never a fan of church doctrine. She found that much of the workings of the church at the time conflicted with a true understanding of the gospel, and that turned her away from organized religion. But unlike most people who turn away from organized religion, she did actually turn to God, and she developed a richer faith on her own. Her faith grew from the seeds that were planted early in life, and that faith was expressed in poetry. The following was a poem of lament as she expressed to God her struggle with challenges in life. Emily lived and wrote during the Civil War, and the following poem reflects her faith in God, trying to process what was going on in her country. She said, "Savior, I have no one else to tell, and so I trouble thee. I am the one who forgot you so. Do you still remember me? Not for myself I come so far, that is a little load. I have brought you the imperial heart I do not have the strength to hold. This heart I carried in my own till mine too heavy grew. Yet stranger, heavier since it went. Is it too large for you?" The imperial heart she's talking about in this poem is the United States torn apart by the Confederacy. The heart of the country is heavy, reflecting on the national sin of slavery, and she is symbolically trying to carry that heart, but she doesn't have the strength to bear the burden. She laments what is going on in the world and asks God if the heaviness of national sorrow is too great a load for even God to bear. Her contemporary faith is expressed through the vehicle of poetry. Despite the challenges she faced in life, her poetry gave her an outlet to express her belief that God would always carry her through. God would always be there to shoulder the load for her when times got tough or challenging. Poetry was her way to cope with life and connect with God in all the circumstances surrounding her. Similarly, the poetry of the Psalms was the way the Hebrew people were able to express God's goodness and grace in the midst of the most challenging circumstances of their time. The book of Psalms is a repository of faith expression in many ways, and the variety of psalms in the canon are as diverse as the themes in Emily Dickinson's canon of poetry. As we look at the book of Psalms, there are a few understandings that we need to acknowledge. First of all, we have often heard that the book of Psalms is the songbook of the Hebrew people. Well, this is true, but saying that, we need to realize that the Hebrew understanding of what a song was 3,000 years ago is much different than our understanding of what a song is today. Many of the psalms were sung, but the song was probably more of a chant, the likes of which we might relate to a monastic order. When our confirmation students a few weeks ago took our annual pilgrimage to places of faith in St. Louis, we visited a Jewish synagogue, Central Reformed congregation in the Central West End. There we heard songs that were very much unlike our white Protestant hymns that we're used to here. Songs that were chanted, songs that were led by a cantor, songs that the Hebrew people were familiar with in their lyrical styling. The singing we heard at the synagogue may be more similar to how the ancient Hebrews sang the Psalms than the way we sing hymns in church on Sunday mornings. But even that expression of faith would have changed greatly over 3,000 years. There are notations in the Psalms that indicate a musical instrument should be employed, but we're not really sure which musical instruments they were using at that time. Certainly harps, lyres, and percussion instruments would enhance the singing of Psalms, but which ones are annotated in the Psalms are still a bit of a question. Some of the Psalms seem more like songs to us than others. There are many different types of Psalms, and the Psalms of Lament might not be as recognizable to us as a song as some of the other ones. There are communal laments, where the entire community chants a lament about a national disaster. And then there are psalms of personal lament, individuals reciting their personal challenges. Certainly Psalm 22, the psalm that Jesus reportedly recited while on the cross, was a psalm of personal lament, appealing to God for deliverance from suffering and hostility. When Jesus on the cross cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" as recorded in Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, he was referring to Psalm 22. Psalm 22, verse 1, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some folks think that he probably said the rest of the psalm at that time too. Laments such as this would be very different than the songs that we sing in worship. Another teaching that must be challenged is the idea that King David wrote all or any of the Psalms. There are many Psalms that are attributed to David, but they are reflections on his life that are written by others. He didn't write them himself. The authorship of the book of Psalms took place over 500 years from the time of King David to after the Jewish exile. It's also believed that the Psalms that were written in the time of King David were edited in later years after the Jews returned from exile. So any thoughts that King David actually wrote the Psalms and this authorship is what we have in our Bible today is a romantic ideal that just doesn't really hold up. We also must realize that the book of Psalms is not just one book, but 5. Each of these books contains psalms written over the course of many centuries, so the books aren't necessarily divided chronologically. But the wisdom of the Psalms lies not in their origin or organization or even in their authorship. The wisdom of the Psalms lies in the expressions of faith that they share with us and the examined faith that is illustrated in their testimony. Take a look at Psalm 8. The psalmist ponders, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands." This psalm journeys from praising God at the beginning to pondering the functions of human existence in the mindset of creation. The psalmist examines who God is, who human beings are in relationship to God, and how human beings must react because of that relationship. Who are we but creations of God? And as such creations, should we not be in concert with God? When we are at loggerheads with other creatures of God, or when we destroy creation for our own narcissistic purposes, how does that affect our relationship with our Creator? These are all themes that must have been examined by this psalmist writing that psalm. In the end, the psalmist praises God for God's wisdom in creating this order of stewardship. Psalm 32 examines the human tendency to pull away from God. The psalmist says, "Happy are those whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sin is covered. Happy are those to whom God impugns no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. Therefore let all who are faithful offer prayer to you in times of distress. You preserve me from trouble and surround me with glad cries of deliverance." Here the psalmist realizes that we are all sinners in one way or another, but when we turn to God and confess our sins, those sins are washed away and we are forgiven. We are cleansed and we emerge closer to God. Today's scripture that Christy read a few moments ago reflects on God delivering the people of Israel from aimlessness and sin, and reminds the nation that God will always give them the strength to persevere. It takes them through the story of the people of Israel, with the call of Abraham and his journey of faith, through the journey of Joseph at the hands of his brothers and his ascendancy to the regency of Egypt, through the Exodus moment when God saved God's people by bringing them through the waters of the Red Sea. But this main theme of the psalm today is a theme of covenant. God creates covenant with God's people again and again and again. In all of these psalms, we see examined faith. And that's the lesson that we can take away from this overview of the Psalms. Writers of these 150 Psalms that we have collected in our Bible, as well as the writers of other Psalms that we don't have in our Bible, and Emily Dickinson, have dedicated their lives to examining their faith. Their faith is examined and expressed through poetry, song, and prose. To them, the unexamined life would not be worth living, and an unexamined faith would be useless. But in our day and culture, we no longer seem to value examined faith. We construct simplistic platitudes about faith and hang our lives on the fragile framework of these simplistic platitudes. In fact, fragile, simplistic verses are what megachurch leaders like Joel Osteen build their empires upon. It's very profitable for a slick televangelist to milk the public's need for instant gratification by giving them simplistic platitudes. It's much harder to develop an examined faith. What our culture needs is to spend time examining their faith and dedicating themselves to constructing a firm theology based on that examination. This is what confirmation is about for our middle school students. But the need is there for adults as well. If we as a culture were to do that and develop a faith that is more like Jesus and less like Joel Osteen and other such televangelists, perhaps our actions as a culture would be more reflective of Jesus as well. James Gustafson is a Presbyterian pastor who in 2004 authored a book called Examined Faith. In this book, he confronts the feel-good, naive, self-serving piety of contemporary cultural Christianity and challenges his readers to investigate their faith more deeply. His book is an invitation to us to examine our faith and why we believe what we do. Last month, I directed middle school camp at Movell. And one of the things we did during our Spirit Rally time, and keep in mind, Spirit Rally is camp talk for Bible study, is to write a psalm. I gave the kids and their counselors 5 to 6 psalms to look at in groups, and then, based on the pattern of those psalms, create a psalm of their own. We had 6 different groups, each one led by 2 counselors, and each of these groups wrote their own psalm. They were beautiful expressions of faith. Each of these psalms represented where these 12, 13, 14, and 15-year-old campers were on their faith journey. Reading the psalms that these kids wrote gave me great insight into their developing faith, and writing these psalms helped them grow in faith as well. So this week, I invite you all to write a psalm as well. Take a look at a few psalms, 5 or 6 psalms, see what they say, the construction, the faith expression, and the intent of the psalmist. Then take pen to paper and write your own psalm. Make it an expression of your faith, just as the psalmists of Jerusalem and the psalmists of middle school camp at Movell did, and the poetry of Emily Dickinson. It doesn't need to rhyme, it doesn't need to be sung, and you really don't have to share it with me if you don't want to. Of course, I'd love to see what you wrote. Maybe you could even put it on Facebook. But if you want to keep it private, that's fine too. But try your hand at writing a psalm and see where your faith leads you. The unexamined life is not worth living, it is said, and the unexamined faith is flimsy indeed. Examine your faith and let it develop, and let your life be a beautiful expression of that faith, a blessing in God's world. Amen.